This is Jenna Phipps. She's currently renovating an abandoned mid-century modern house, and these massive pieces of wood that we're loading into my van are old-growth Douglas fir beams. Now, this is a pretty intense renovation, and while they had to throw a lot of stuff in the dumpster, Jenna did not want these beautiful giant beams going to the dump. So when I posted on Instagram that I was looking for salvaged wood in Vancouver, she was happy to give me as many beams as I could carry for free.
Let's see, 8, 16. There must be about 25 feet of these beams. I got these 2 big pieces and 2 shorter ones down here, and I am stoked.
If you've watched my channel before, you'll know I like doing these trash to treasure projects, where I take wood that's destined for the landfill and turn it into a high-end piece of furniture, which I then sell. And that's what I was planning on doing with this wood until another idea came up while I was at Jenna's.
Actually, one idea we had, which may or may not happen, is to actually make this into a table for Jenna and her partner to use in their finished house. But considering that won't happen for about 2 years, the timelines might not align.
It's funny. In that moment, the fact that Jenna's house wasn't going to be done for about 2 years felt like a deal breaker for what was honestly the perfect project. I mean, to transform this wood into an heirloom piece of furniture that would live in the house from where the wood came, that's just awesome. And I think Jenna felt the same way because when I got home after picking up the beams, I checked my phone and saw that she was very interested in making this idea happen. So I said, yes, let's do it, and we started brainstorming furniture ideas. Even though they're a bit of a ways away from move-in, Jenna and Nick had already put a lot of thought into their furniture. They had their dream coffee table, a Noguchi, as well as Togo couches. As we were texting ideas back and forth, Jenna found this really cool side table design that would complement the relatively low couches and really show off the beams beautifully. And I'm gonna keep that design a secret until the end of the video when I deliver the tables to Jenna, and you can tell me how I did at executing her vision.
No way!
Now, I have never worked with pieces of wood this big. Well, I guess I kind of have, but those were slabs and I was doing operations on top of them, not pushing them through an underpowered table saw. For the first beam, I cut it in 2 passes, but even that was bogging down the table saw. So for the second, I did it in 3. I think because Douglas fir is technically a softwood, people assume it's, well, soft, but softwood just means that it comes from a conifer tree. Douglas fir is actually harder than some hardwoods, and I was really feeling that on the table saw. I mean, this was giving hard maple a run for its money. And you can see why. Just look at how tight that grain is. That is why people love old growth wood. So when Jenna and I settled on this design, I wanted to preserve some of the weathering on the beams, but I quickly realized that to build these end tables successfully, the wood needed to be square, and in their natural state, these beams were far from it. They required jointing and planing on all 4 sides, which did remove that cool patina, but honestly, this wood still has a ton of character. Some of the pieces have these giant holes, which someone drilled probably 70 years ago to pass wire, and I think these look awesome. This video is brought to you by Morley Kurt channel memberships. By becoming a channel member, you gain access to behind-the-scenes content, live Q&As, my private Discord server, and more. There are some really fun features right here on YouTube, like custom emojis and featured comments from channel members. To learn more, hit the join button down below, and thank you to my top supporters, Paige Arlt, Luis Armendariz, and my mom, Kathy Kurt. Love you, Mom. All right, back to the build. When you're working with giant pieces of lumber, every cut is a full-scale operation. Standard woodworking tools just aren't big enough, and I had to flip these 4 times just to cut them to length on the miter saw. This seemed like it would work well until I got to the last side and saw that my 4th cut did not line up with my 1st. This is probably a combination of imperfect technique and a miter saw that isn't quite square, and it was clear that this just wasn't going to give me the clean square cuts I needed. So I moved over to the table saw, but even that didn't provide enough cutting height to cut all the way through. So I switched to a lower profile crosscut sled, and that gave me just enough blade height to finish the cut. One of my favorite things about repetitive work is you really get the technique dialed in by the time you get to the last piece, which is also kind of a sick irony. I had to cut 8 of these pieces to 18 inches, and believe it or not, it took me until piece number 7 to realize I could just use a stop block instead of lining up each cut by eye. But I will say that my eyeballed cuts turned out pretty much exactly as good as the ones where I used a stop block. It was just way less efficient. So here are the 4 pieces that will make up one side table, and you can see that my cuts weren't perfect, but that doesn't really matter. It's close enough that we can get those flush at the end with some sanding. Now, if you missed my last video about why we quit van life, then you might not know where I'm working right now. This is the Vancouver Hackspace. It is a shared workshop, and one of the amazing things about this place is just how many tools it has that I didn't have in my last shop, like the bandsaw, for example. I've made angle legs before using a track saw, and it was a huge pain. You have to make sure that everything's clamped down, that you have support for the track, space on either side of the cut. It's a nightmare. So by comparison, making these cuts on the bandsaw was an absolute dream. I didn't have to make the cuts perfectly either. I tried to keep them straight, about a hair off the line, and then I made each cut perfectly flat and square on the jointer, which is another tool that I didn't have in my garage. Honestly, if you live somewhere that has a nonprofit hackspace or makerspace like this one, and I say nonprofit because they are way cheaper than for-profit makerspaces, just join it, they're incredible. So what I'm doing here is adding a spacer to each mating face of the side table. This is purely aesthetic to create a nice uniform gap between the pieces, and to achieve that, I'm using an offcut from the same beam that I planed to a 1/4 inch thick. I'm being really careful to inset those spacers a consistent 1/4 inch from the exposed edges, and I'm just using the thickness of another spacer to achieve that. I'm intentionally keeping the pin nails away from the edge because I'm going to be putting the quadrants together with dominoes. For hidden joinery that needs to be dead-on accurate, dominoes are kind of the best choice, and this is actually my first time using them. I bought the DF500 for this project, so I guess you could say that I'm officially an out-of-touch YouTube woodworker. In all seriousness, I think it's kind of funny how much hate these machines get. They're about $1,500 Canadian or $1,100 American, and yeah, that's not cheap, but most people buying these are professional woodworkers. And when you think about the potential cost of professional equipment, that's not bad. You could easily spend $20,000 on a piece of factory equipment if you ran, say, an injection molding business. But I get it, $1,100 is way out of range for a lot of hobby woodworkers, so if you are on a budget, you could definitely make these joints with a doweling jig, which is about 20 times cheaper. While the first glue up was drying, I thought I'd deal with the other 2 beams that had been sitting in my van for about 2 weeks. If you remember from the beginning of the video, I got 2 5-foot sections and 2 8-foot sections from Jenna. I milled up the 5-foot sections to make the end tables, and I only used about 70% of that, but I still hadn't even touched the 8-foot beams. I was planning on cutting them down so I could fit them in the little storage unit that I have in my apartment building, but I still don't know what I'm gonna do with these, and I want to leave the option open for a big monumental dining table or some other large piece of furniture. And luckily, I have the most supportive wife in the world who was happy to let me store them in our apartment for an indefinite period of time. After taking out the nails, of course. Let me know in the comments what you think I should build with these beams. And if you're in the Vancouver area and you want me to make you a custom piece of furniture using this wood, send me a message on Instagram.
What?
With the first glue up dry, I was ready to glue the 2 halves together. And this is another great example of how much you can learn through a repetitive project. You might have noticed that for the first run of dominoes, I did this really awkward vertical operation, and that made it super hard to reference the top edge. So this time I just stood up the half and held it in place with my forearms and dominoed the dominoes horizontally, which was way less awkward and made for a more accurate cut. Doing dominoes along 2 axes like this ensures that both the top and sides of the table are perfectly aligned. And that's really the main utility of dominoes. They do add strength, but wood glue on edge grain alone is super strong. But if I had just used glue, these joints would probably slide around as I was clamping. Dominoes allow me to create a blind joint that is perfectly aligned. The funny thing about the word perfect is when you use it to describe your work, you're basically asking karma to laugh in your face. But that's kind of the beauty of woodworking. You try your best, you set things up as perfectly as you can, but in the end, you're just a human making something by hand, and things tend to turn out different from how you planned. And that's why when I took the first table out of the clamps and saw that it had a pretty significant wobble, I wasn't surprised. Now, in my University of YouTube woodworking education, I've learned that you can eliminate the wobble on a table or chair by sticking a piece of sandpaper onto a known flat surface and sanding one of the higher legs. And I'm gonna be honest here. This was one of the worst woodworking experiences I've ever had. I don't know if I just didn't put in enough elbow grease or the wobble was too much for this technique, but 5 minutes of sweaty hand sanding seemed to do absolutely nothing. So I moved into the 21st century and replaced elbow grease with a power tool. But still, it didn't really seem to make a difference. And maybe that's a testament to this awesome, dense, old-growth Douglas fir, but nevertheless, I did not feel comfortable sending out a table that's wobbly right out of the shop. So, like a tetrapod crawling onto land, I moved up to the table saw, used a crosscut sled to shave a hair off of one leg, and it took out the wobble beautifully. Lesson learned. If you've got big power tools, just use them. A dusty shared workshop isn't the best place for applying finish, so after sanding the tables to 220 grit, I brought them back to our apartment to finish on the kitchen table. I'm using an exterior grade water-based polyurethane for ease of application and maximum durability. I feel like the interior and exterior grade polyurethanes are always right next to each other on the shelf, and the exterior one is only like $5 more expensive, so I just always use it. I feel like there's no downside to a more durable finish. Oh, by the way, if you're also a 3D printing woodworker, these little painting pyramids are like one of the most useful STLs I've ever downloaded. I'll link it in the description. I applied 4 coats, sanding before the last one, and finished off the tables with some screw-on felt pads.
I'm on my way to Jenna's house to deliver the finished end tables. I've sent her like 0 progress pictures, so I am very curious to see her reaction. I feel like it's this grand reveal, but it's like these very small tables.
The side tables?
Wow. There they are.
No way.
This
is wild to see this as furniture, because this was like rotten beam in our house that we were scared of taking out. Like, this is so crazy.
It's super tight grained. It was like getting this cut on the table saw was a bit of a chore.
I was gonna say, yeah. How many passes was it?
These are, oh my gosh, the weight on this, feel this.
Yeah, they're pretty hefty.
Ooh.
This is so cool that this was just a part of the home.
Yeah.
And now it's
We're gonna like start making like more things like this.
That's
too,
awesome.
Where it's like,
hopefully when once we're done the home in the future, in a couple years from now.
Honestly, it would have been cool to get some beauty shots of the end tables in Jenna's finished house, all decorated in its mid-century modern glory. But there is something pretty awesome about seeing these tables among the half-disassembled house that created them, especially with those old-growth studs in the background. And I guess I'm just gonna have to stay in Vancouver for 2 years so I can get those photos once Jenna finishes the house. Oh, by the way, here is the original inspiration photo that Jenna sent me. Let me know in the comments how you think I did and what you think I should do with the rest of this gorgeous wood. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.